I do?
Nothing, dear. You're not qualified. Sedate her, number the child, measure its blood type, and...
Some people still believe that the earth is flat, that you'll get cramps if you swim after eating, and even that the check really is in the mail. Over time, all these well-known beliefs have been discredited. Still, there are those that hold on to them. Listed among these beliefs is the fact that births in hospitals with doctors are safer than births at home with midwives. Americans, known for being forward-thinking revolutionaries, have the strongest hold on this old belief. The truth is out, however, and bit by bit Americans are catching up with countries such as Switzerland, Australia, and Spain, all of which believe that not only are midwife-attended births safer, but to be preferred to births in hospitals with doctors. In order to understand why midwives are considered outdated, one must look in the past. In the 1920s and the 1930s, the era was all about profit, and one of the opportunities with profit were to move births into hospitals. And so the profession of OBGYNs were created, and births moved into the hospitals. Up until this point, many mothers gave birth at home, and in order to move these women into the hospital, an advertising campaign was started. These advertising campaigns preyed on women's fears about having a safe birth and whether or not their child would be born healthy. So by preying on these fears, advertisements increased them, and women moved from home into the hospitals. In the 1900s, 95% of births in the United States took place at home. In 1938, half of them took place at home. And by 1955, only 1% of births took place at home. The number remains that to this day. Change happened. The basic idea of the advertising campaign was to exaggerate the risk of having a home birth. Safe births meant big money, and doctors could charge thousands for the idea that hospital births were safer. But we really must question whether or not they are safe. A hospital is much like a business. They want to keep profits high and personal costs low. In The Business of Being Born, a documentary, OBGYNs and nurses were interviewed to find out what the typical woman would experience giving birth in a hospital. Here is a segment that illustrates what they discovered in their interviews.
You're not allowed to have very long labors. So if you're not dilating rapidly, which you're likely not to do if you get an epidural early in labor, you will be given Pitocin. They'll put the Pitocin in the IV. It will flow into your veins. Pitocin makes contractions longer and stronger and closer together. So then the pain of labor is much worse. So you go with that for a while because you have the epidural, but eventually the pain of the contractions is overwhelming the epidural. You need to up the epidural, and then labor slows down more because of that, so then you need more Pitocin. Now you're not feeling the pain of the extra Pitocin because you've got the epidural, but your baby is getting compressed blood and oxygen supply because Pitocin contractions last so long and are so strong, the blood and oxygen flow to the baby is compromised. So then the baby's likely to go into distress, and then you're sent off for an emergency cesarean from a baby in distress from contractions induced by the Pitocin, which was necessitated by the epidural.
Step by step, one intervention leads to a series of interventions. And the net result is the mother finally ends up with a cesarean, and everybody says, thank God we were able to do all those interventions to save your baby. The fact of the matter is, if they didn't start the cascade of interventions, none of that would have been necessary.
Predictably enough, such practices have harsh consequences. In most developed countries like America, the rate of C-sections is 4 to 6%, and in America itself, the C-section rate is a shocking 31%. Infections are on the rise because of this. Open surgery is, after all, dangerous. The familiar theme of profit is brought to mind as well. The typical vaginal birth costs between $9,000 and $17,000. A C-section birth costs between $14,000 and $25,000, or more. And these figures do not include the pit and epidural. One must look at America's overall health as well. 99% of births in the U.S. take place in hospitals, and yet we have a whopping infant mortality rate of 6.71 deaths per 1,000. In other similarly developed countries, that rate is a mere 3.5. In these countries, 80 to 90% of births are overseen by midwives and at home. Most of these facts are forgotten, however, because Americans believe midwives are unprepared for birthing emergencies. This perceived fact is what keeps births in the walls of a hospital. This is far from the truth, however. Midwives are very prepared. Midwives form intimate relationships with their patients, allowing them to spot early signs of complications. They are trained in placing IVs and can come prepared with uterotonics to stop uterine hemorrhages, and they also know positions to place the mother in case the fetus becomes stuck in the pelvis. They are also trained in neonatal resuscitation in case the child is born not breathing. There are many positive health outcomes for women who have home births as well. When you don't have a lot of medical intervention, you also tend to have more breastfeeding and reduced rates of postpartum depression. Postpartum depression is linked to stressful births, and with the high rate of emergency C-sections in hospitals, births there tend to be very stressful. Facts and figures aside, a woman's overall experience must be taken into account. Melissa Cheney, a professor of anthropology at OSU, describes the simplistic way Americans view birthing. The U.S. has a limited idea of what it means to have a positive outcome at the end of a delivery. Basically, it just means that everyone is alive. Modern medicine may still be seen as safer, but medicalizing it can also turn what could be a joyous experience for the mother into the equivalent of an all-day appendectomy. Mothers who have home births assisted by midwives, especially those who have had previous births in hospitals, have only positive things to say about their experience. Many go as far as to say it was more relaxing and memorable. Despite the ample facts and figures in favor of midwife-attended births, America still clings to the cultural ideas of the past. While equally developed countries have embraced home births, America has yet to become modernized in its view of the birthing process. It is a natural process, not something to be medicalized and intervened. More importantly, America should not believe old tales of safer births, and remember how humans came to populate the planet before hospitals were around, through midwives and home births.